Good morning. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about appraisals, and we're going to go back 9 years to where we essentially started the conference, which was we're going to put a topic out there, and then we're going to engage the audience in the questions, because we want to make sure we get your questions answered about appraisals today. There have been some big changes in the process of appraising Indian land and how it connects to other lands on the outside or fee lands. And so today we have two very different speakers. For those of you who've been in land for a while, you will probably know Eldred Lisanzi. And the other person you have not met so much is Andrew Gadages. Is that how you say it? Yeah. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We're going to start with a few topics, and then we're going to get you involved in asking the questions and not so much sitting and listening to the presentations, but rather getting questions answered. All right? Sound good? Everybody in? All right. Eldred, do you want to start?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Eldred Lisanzi. I'm a member of the Pueblo of Zuni from New Mexico and Arizona. I'm the current Associate Deputy Director for the Appraisal and Valuation Services Office within the Department of Interior. I was a former Director of the Office of Appraisal Services with OST. But the best thing about me, I think, is I'm a proud father of 5 young men and a husband of a wife that's endured me for about 30 years, and so that's the best thing about me, I think. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Andy Gaditis. I grew up in eastern North Dakota in a small rural town of 600 people. I work for Farmers National Company, which is a land services company. Primarily, we deal in farm management, where we manage land for absentee landowners. Also, we have anywhere 20 to 25 certified residential appraisers. Our area is about 29 states, and we do a lot of fee work for banks and estates and litigation.
All right, so let's start with the very basics. And Eldred, this is probably most easily answered by you, is what land activities in Indian country need an appraisal?
Well, Chris, I'll start with, it's easier actually to do it the other way around. What real estate transactions do not require an appraisal? One is mortgages. We do not do valuations for mortgage purposes. The lending institutions are required by FIREA to provide an appraisal or obtain an appraisal to manage their portfolios, loan portfolios. So we do not do valuations for lending purposes. Secondly, we do not do valuations of fee lands. There's a Deputy Commissioner of Indian Affairs policy memorandum or directive that prohibited us from doing valuation of fee property for acquisition purposes or other purposes. So that's another area we don't do. The exception would be, in fee land, would be right-of-way valuations where right-of-way crosses multiple land ownership, including fee lands, state lands, federal lands, Indian lands. Let's see, there's another one. Probate purposes where valuation is not required. Purchase of probate, yes. For other activities in probate, such as, the spousal distribution, the state law regarding state laws there's a threshold or funding amount that the states require that the first so many dollars go to the living spouse, and we do valuations for that purpose, for probate purposes. But if it's just a general probate transaction that transfers ownership from a deceased individual to an eligible heir without any cost or value or transfer related compensation, we won't do those. We generally don't do them. But we do valuations for right-of-ways, for leases, whether it's commercial, agricultural, properties, industrial. We do valuations for land exchanges. We do valuations for sales, acquisitions, land exchanges, just about anything. I mean, we do right-of-ways for like linear right-of-ways or for non-linear right-of-ways valuations. That's one thing that's, I think, reason why I came back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Indian Affairs in general in valuations of Indian property is you don't know what type of appraisal problem you're going to get. So it makes it very interesting, but it also makes it challenging. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a question over here. When you're asking a question, I'd ask you to state your name and where you're from and what you do, where you're from. And I told these guys it wouldn't take long to get started.
Kelly George, I'm from the Umatilla Indian Reservation, which is located in eastern Oregon. And Eldred, you mentioned you do not evaluate mortgages. On the Umatilla Indian Reservation, they don't value property. I'd like to know why, and is that something that will be considered in the future on allotted lands?
Are you referring to structural improvements?
What's that?
Are you referring to structural evaluation of structural improvements?
Homes,
Yes.
shops, buildings.
Thank you for bringing that up. Since I think it was related to, a probate a policy, they'd identified structural improvements on Indian trust and restricted lands as personal property. And we do not do valuation of personal property, only trust property. So we do not do valuations of residential structural improvements. However, I know in eastern Oklahoma and western Oklahoma or southern plains, they have been doing valuation of structural improvements from time to time.
So Andrew, a question to you is if you have a property with permanent structures on it, do you do the appraisal on the whole piece at one time?
Yeah, typically what I'll get is a property, and in an appraisal, I'll have the structure, and I'll use the cost approach to come up with depreciations and RCNs. The comparable sales part, you'll have the land unit that you can figure out a cost or the value of that and apply that towards the subject property land. So you have the two parts, you have the land and the structure, and the combination is the value.
Okay.
We generally follow the same approach because there's three approaches to value that you can use to estimate a market value for, say, residential property. You can do the income approach, cost approach, or the sales comparison approach. Sales comparison approach is very difficult because finding comparable sales on the reservation and similar type of comparables for the subject property that's situated on the reservation is really difficult to find, especially HUD homes that are tract homes that are hard. There's not a lot of properties that is directly comparable to the properties on the reservation. But we do the cost approach, and we also do the valuation of the land with the sales comparison approach. If we do structural improvements, but we've done that in the past too as well.
So, Eldred, I had a question. If we have a 40-acre trust allotment with a home on it, and they want to sell it to the tribe, do we get the valuation for the property from the BIA, then a valuation from an outside source for the home, or what is the recommended choice?
Yeah, with that transaction, and by the way, Umatilla, since you're a self-governance tribe that operate the appraisal function, you can customize your program the way you find it, that works for your nation. So in that case, you can, if there's a transfer between the individual landowner and the tribe, you can do the valuation of both the structure and the land since it's transferring to the nation as the nation's purchasing it. But as you know, the land buyback program recently did a lot of valuations on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and they considered the contributory value of the improvements and land improvements in their valuations, as they did valuations of tracts on the Umatilla Indian reservations, they didn't look at it as raw land, but they looked at it based on what contributions the existing improvements, especially land improvements, made on the land as far as highest best use.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Tess from Cauville Tribes, and I'm in Andy. And I was wondering, they do the comparables a lot of the times, but they do the comparables with fee land homes, and it's so far out of whack that, I mean, what's the answer to that? How do we get the prices to where the people, you know, the tribal members can afford it? Because their houses are nowhere near in the ballpark of what the fee land, you know, off reservation
Right.
homes are.
I don't have a lot of experience in valuing lands on the nations, so I don't know exactly how to answer that because I don't know the difference between the fee simple and the property on your area. And one of the differences that would be is the property rights that are associated with it. And I think that's the underlying concept that you're trying to get at, is that the fee simple and the structure tied together have different rights than the properties that of the allotment and the structure on it. So it can be a difficult process, and the sales used would be hard to find because you need to find some with the similar type property types, property ownership rights in it. So a property right next door to each other with different ownership structures have a significantly different market value. That's what basically your question was.
Yeah, but how could a piece of fee land that's right next door to the allotment be so much higher than the allotment when they're essentially right?
The appraiser process on the allotment must have had a direction that he applied some discounts to it for the multiple ownerships. Would that?
One person owns it, one over one, even then, it's like they're lowballing the price, the allotment.
I can see that that would be an issue, and the specific example, I wouldn't have it shouldn't be that much different. If there's similar use and there's similar value in the return that you're going to get on it for as far as for farming or ranching, the value shouldn't be all that much different.
I see really big differences. I was wondering how they come up with the numbers.
Right.
First of all, where did you get the appraisal? Was it from the AVS office in Portland, or was it from a lending institution? Portland? Okay. Well, like you said, there shouldn't be a major difference. There should be adjustments made to the sales to make it comparable to, similar to the subject property, which is Indian trust lands or trust property. The things that, the reason why it's so tricky to value or compare fee dwellings or structural improvements with those properties on Indian land is whether the property or the structural property is, how similar is it to the property on the Indian reservation? Are they the same as far as the quality, the construction type, the number of rooms, I mean, the size and so forth? Are they comparing apples to apples, in other words?
Because I'm talking about just land
Sure.
without structure.
Okay.
I see huge differences.
Well, it's hard to address that, but we can, without looking at the valuations, but if you ever have those kind of issues that really jump out and bother you, or you have a concern about it, feel free to call me and I'll contact Tim Hansen. He's our chief appraiser, and he's also in charge of quality control. We'll take a look at what that issue is and see what we can find out about that particular valuation, because that concerns me if we have those kind of issues.
Gabrielle Tateushkanshka from Sistenwapton Oyate. And the question I have is, when you separate the land from the structures or the homes, one of the problems we're having is somebody owns the home, doesn't have a right of way to access to the home, and then they don't own the land beneath it. Right. So when people are selling houses and homes, and then the houses are left in the air, it really makes it difficult for heirs who own the home and the heirs who have the houses, and what it's leading to is friction between families and no clear no clear ownership to either one or access.
I agree. I think it creates a problem when ownership is, first of all, you can't have a severed ownership between the structural improvement and the underlying land. And then within the underlying land, you can have multiple owners. And or maybe one of the multiple owners actually live on the property and have built a home on it. And with that situation, if there's not a home site lease, that creates a problem too as well. And so that's the first step, is getting a home site lease to make sure that that person who's occupying that property or someone who wishes to build on that property has a home site lease. When we value, the reason why we value, when we do valuations, we do a lot of research on the underlying interest, as the gentleman here talked about, is because we want to identify the appraisal problem. We want to make sure that if there's a severed ownership, that we value it according to the ownership. If we're valuing the structural improvement, we can't value the property of the land and add it to or what do you call it? Reconcile the valuation of the structural improvement to the land and give it a total property value, because that one owner who owns structure doesn't own the land. It could be tribal land, or it could be land owned by multiple owners, and that land ownership, the total value of the land, in addition to the structural improvement, doesn't go to that one owner. So it can be tricky.
So that's a topic that the foundation's been trying to get people interested in changing for some time, because not only do you've bifurcated the title, and you've got trust land and fee land with different ownerships, but in many cases, there's no one tracking the ownership of the fee land. The county's not doing it. The tribes weren't set up to do it. And in fact, we at least kept the land buyback program from buying land with permanent structures on it for a number of years, until they decided 2 years ago to change that. So we'd still like to get that changed. And we actually tracked down the person who wrote the piece that became the technical amendment. And it was, in essence, to avoid pieces related to liabilities of asbestos and lead paint and other pieces on the permanent structures.
Yeah, my name is Winfield Rondell. I'm councilman from the Siston Wapton Oyate. So the situation we are talking about, how do we remedy that?
I think one of the ways you could do that is by consolidating the ownership, managing, talking with the various different owners within that one property, and seeing if they're interested in managing that property to consolidate their ownership, or to make it, of course, you can't just take the land, but maybe develop a strategy on how to make that property more manageable by consulting the landowners, or property owners, I should say, including the structural improvements and the land, to see what is in their best interest as far as ownership is concerned. And we can support you once you decide what your strategy is in doing the valuation.
So before this happened, what could have been done so that this wouldn't have happened? What should have been done in that program, realty program?
But I think the real property management is something outside our scope, but as appraisers, but we can help as far as consultation as to what effect a particular transaction would have on the ownership or the value of the property, and control and management of the property too as well. We do real property consultation as well as valuations and reviews. So you could contact your local appraiser they're located in Aberdeen, and get the consultation before a transaction occurs, or like that transaction occurs.
What we've been suggesting is that they treat permanent structures or define permanent structures on fee land as restricted fee property, which would, and manage the restricted fee property as you would trust property. But it would relieve their liability issues and at the same time tie those titles back together.
George Ducharme, Sailor's Kootenai up in Montana. Eldridge? I don't think we have an appraisal problem here or a management problem here. What we have is a probate problem. The probate problem is that they decided that the land and the structures would not be treated the same. In the past, they were. APRA came along and changed that. What we need to do is change back to where the land and structures are tied together as one whole part. And then one thing we do on Sailor's Kootenai is when we have an appraisal, when I order an appraisal, I want the appraisal to be both properties appraised as if fee simple. So there is no big gap between Indian land and fee land. Treat them both as one and the same, fee simple.
I agree. And then I agree with that. And one of the other limitations we have in doing valuations of property that's situated on Indian trust lands, particularly reservations where the tribe is they're active in purchasing property on the reservation, and they keep a database of these transactions. However, when we go about doing the valuations and do our comparable sales research, we go to the tribe and ask for that information for the tribe on reservation transactions that are specifically made between the landowners, our property owners, and the tribe. And sometimes we don't get access to it. So we go to the neighboring areas outside the reservation boundary, and those values, like somebody mentioned here, tend to be a lot higher than what's on the reservation. So access to comparable sales data is really key, because the best data will provide you the best information, or the estimates of value.
One of the things would be the scope of work. And what I see is that the clients ask for something that they know isn't true with the property, but it's not far off. So you may have a client say, I know it's owned by 10 different people, but I want you to appraise it as fee simple. And then that gives the appraiser the guidelines to follow to value the property using the other fee simple properties.
Yeah, Eldridge, George Ducharme, one more time from Sailor's Kootenai. The reason we don't give out our appraisal or land ownership information is because typically that elder needed that money. The appraisal come in at this, the tribes decided, we're going to help them out, and we inflate that appraisal rate, and we don't want to drive our own market, so that's why we don't release it.
Okay. Yeah, and when we get those type of sales that might have special motivations, we typically don't, the appraisers typically don't use those type of sales either. Yeah. The other thing, just kind of follow up what you said, is that because in order to facilitate the comparison process, we use fee land sales, land transactions, or property transactions to do valuations of Indian trust property. And we look at the Indian trust property as if it's in fee simple ownership to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples and not trusts to fee.
So many people in Indian country have heard that the process is changing. And Eldred, I wondered if you could give us the quick run through on how the process has changed for getting appraisals done.
Actually, I wrote it over.
Grab that microphone.
I wrote it over there, but I'll just talk about it because, it's so small. But the appraisal process actually hasn't changed. Thank you. The appraisal process hasn't changed. I mean, it begins with appraisal request in OASIS, or you can do a hard copy request to the local or regional AVSO office. And then your request, if you submit it through OASIS, the RSA receives it, and when they open it, it becomes live, and then they look at the request to make sure that it's valid in terms of the content and accuracy of the property, because sometimes we have had requests where the wrong property was identified or the wrong legal description was provided to us. So we verify things in the request. And once that request has been verified, then the RSA Regional Supervisory Appraiser will assign it to an appraiser if it's an appraisal request, or reviewer if it's a request for a review of an appraisal report. And then the next step would be the assigned appraiser would do the appraisal, perform the appraisal or the appraisal review. And the next step in the process would be that the appraisal, if it's an appraisal, then the appraisal review is completed on that appraisal. If it's a review, then the review report is completed, and I think sometimes the regional supervisory appraiser looks at the report, the review report, as for quality control purposes. And once that has passed the regional supervisory appraiser, then the report, whether it's an appraisal or appraisal review, is uploaded into OASIS, and we notify BIA that they can obtain the appraisal from our centralized system. If it's the old conventional process, will mail the work appraisal products to BIA, and that completes our appraisal cycle. And that hasn't changed from OAS to AVSO. And the new office that does all valuations of Indian Trust property is the Indian Trust Property Valuation Division within AVSO.
So all of you in the audience know Eldred and I get along very well. We like each other.
Absolutely.
But we have a difference of opinion, and that's on how long it takes to get an appraisal done. And so, Eldred, maybe you could point out where some of the pitfalls are along that process. And then, Andy, maybe you could talk about how long it takes to do an appraisal that is done on the outside. So, Eldred, go ahead and tell us where the pitfalls are that hold up things.
Okay. Sometimes one of the biggest pitfalls is not knowing that an appraisal request is out there, sitting there somewhere in the process. And we find whether it's within our office or within BIA or a requesting somewhere in the process. That's the biggest pitfall. We've had situations where someone thought that the appraisal request was made and it was submitted to AVSO. Back then it was OAS, and this was up in the Northwest in one particular situation where it was a major economic development lease. And when we did the research, the request had not made it to AVSO, and that deal actually fell through. And those kind of situations, I think, as I was talking to Chris earlier, is that if you submit a request to AVSO, you don't hear, or to BIA, or to the tribe, and you don't hear about that request, call us directly, and we'll circle back to the tribe or the BIA to find out what the status of that appraisal request. I think better communication.
What's the time
overall.
frame of that? So if they don't hear in 2 weeks, 2 months?
Well, it depends. Sometimes our turnaround time, believe it or not, like in eastern Oklahoma for some of those probate actions, I think they have a turnaround time of 2 weeks. So you don't have a lot of wiggle room. But if a transaction, if you don't hear about a request, I mean, we give like a 10-day turnaround time for responding back to the request, or maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, or something like that. Whatever your timeline is as far as your real estate transaction timeline. Some timelines are really short. Some have some, or lenient, or have some room.
Yes, thank you, Eldridge. Delano Saluskin, Yakima Nation. You're talking about the process and everything.
Mm-hmm.
We have a situation on the Yakima Reservation where our agriculture and farm leases are so far behind schedule that they're allowing the leaseor to pay a what- trespass, and that's because they can't get the appraisals done in a timely manner. And that's been going on for some time now. And it's really unfair to the landowner, the landowners, because they don't get paid additional compensation for having their lands leased in a trespass status.
Right.
So how are we going to overcome that? Because that's really becoming a major obstacle to getting the best value for the members who own land on our reservation.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and we provided, we went over to meet with the Yakima Nation Council and Chairman last year, and we provided, I think, 5 options on how AVSO could assist, because the Yakima Nation operates the appraisal function under a 638 contract, and we can go so far in helping the nation in providing valuation services or technical assistance, but because the nation operates the appraisal function, we have to respect the self-determination of the nation. So we've provided options on how we can help. We haven't heard back from the nation, but we stand ready to help if you still need the help.
So I guess you have the BIA appraisals and you have non-BIA appraisals. So if we're not able to get things done through the BIA appraisal, how can we use the outside appraisers to help facilitate moving things forward then?
If your appraiser that you have on staff, and I believe you have a chief appraiser and a trainee, if they can't do the work that meets your expectation and timelines, you can use that money for tribal shares, the tribal share funding, and contract for outside appraisers to do the work. But I understand that the cost of appraisals is pretty expensive on the Yakima Indian Reservation. That's one thing, because there's limited appraisers that actually have bid it for the work on the reservation, and that's limited to how far your money goes to buy appraisal services. That's what we've been told. We provide a lot of consultation by our regional supervisory appraisers to the Yakima Nation as far as how they can better manage the program, different options on how they can obtain more appraisals for what you receive.
So if we were to give back the appraisals to the BIA, would we get better timely service then?
I believe we can, because with the mass appraisal, with the buyback program, we've applied mass appraising to market rental estimates in the Southern Plains region. It's almost done, but if we can do that, we can apply mass appraisals. We can probably do a lot more valuations on other reservations that do farm and grazing type leases, which is in your situation. So I think we can. I believe we can do a better, faster job actually getting more appraisers, resources to the nation to help you out.
Hi, I'm Ernie Stensgar. I'm from the Coeur d'Alene tribe.
Yes, sir.
And we have reservation is made up of agriculture land and timberland. A lot of lotties are want to sell, and we have a list of people that want to sell, and we want to give them fair market value, and we're behind. Not our fault. We're looking at appraisals, but just listening to her, when it seems like the policy. The appraisal policy itself needs fixing, and I would take into account everything. And where would we start at to start fixing this as policy people?
Well, under this new organization, let me click to the organization chart. Let's see. This is how we look right now. We have the technical services division, which is headed by a chief appraiser. That's where all the policy development is done. And the principal deputy director to the right approves all policies for real estate appraisals and mineral appraisals in the Department of Interior. this is what we look like. And the associate deputy director, that's me. And then we have a business services manager that supports the valuation process throughout all of AVSL. And then we have the 4 valuation divisions below. We have the buyback program valuation division, we have the federal lands valuations division, and then the division of mineral evaluations. So that's where it starts, is in the technical services department. If you have any questions and recommendations on how the appraisal process could change to streamline the process, Tim Hansen is the name. There's a brochure right here that has his contact information. That's where you start.
Seems like if we took some of that money from those guys and put it down on the ground for appraisals, we could get more done.
I agree. And you know what? That's part of the, I was going to talk about that, but that's part of the streamlining that we're doing. And when we realized that, the department looked at our organization and saw that we're top-heavy. Secondly, there was about half of our staff in the Indian Trust Valuations Division was administrative staff. So there wasn't a lot of appraisers to do the work. So right now we're restructuring. There's restructuring plans going on to make sure that there's more appraisal resources to do the appraisal work. And the grades and the cost of the overall operations for Indian Trust is minimized. And that's part of the executive order, I think it's 13781, that was issued last year, I believe, by the president to establish efficiencies, accountability of the federal agencies. And we've been tasked to streamline our business process.
So Andrew and I were having a conversation earlier, and he was talking about different appraisal forms that they submit to banks and others for the reports that they do under the appraisals. And I'm wondering, Andrew, if you could just quickly run through some of that, and there may be some opportunities for the tribes and the tribal programs that actually run their own appraisals to begin changing some of that. But then I guess we would go back to Eldred and find out whether or not that's going to be allowable even under the Trust Reform Act. So
Essentially, there's 2 different types of appraisals. There's the appraisal report and a restricted use appraisal. The difference that I tell my clients is that appraisal report is what banks require. There's a little more statements in there that need to be in there for what they want to do. The restricted use reports I do for estates. We're just trying to establish a value for a stepped-up basis. Also, if an owner wants to buy or sell and they don't need it for financing, we'll do a restricted use appraisal. But within those 2 types of appraisals, there's form reports and there's narrative reports. And what I see is that the secondary market, so the big banks that do financing with their smaller bank, when the smaller bank does the loan and they sell it to the bigger bank has boxes that the appraisal, they like to have it fit in there. And the form reports usually work with those so that it covers all their steps that they want. The narrative reports, which is what I do, sometimes aren't what the larger banks like, because some of the adjustments that I do aren't standardized that the form reports have. The difference is that there's a UAAR, which is the form report, then there's the ASF MRA organization, which I'm a part of, and they teach it slightly different. And sometimes it's important that the client knows what they're going to get, so that if they're not surprised when they get the report and they realize, well, this isn't what I wanted, and it doesn't fit what they need.
In the Indian Trust Property Valuation Division, they also do the similar type of reports, except the residential form report. The chief appraiser with the Department of Interior, I guess the policy issued recently under the DM does not allow for form reports for residential purposes. So that's one area that we could talk to the chief appraiser and see if we can change his mind about that. But at this point, the policy states in the Department of Interior that we don't accept form reports for residential properties.
Eldred, who dictates the extraordinary assumptions in an appraisal? It has legal access and it does not. It's a single owner and it's highly fractionated. Who dictates that? Is that the Bureau or is it the tribe?
It's the appraiser of record. The appraiser of record determines what they determine is required for an extraordinary assumption in order to do or to provide a credible opinion of value. And that extraordinary assumption has to be substantiated too as well. It can't be something that would is not credible or is not it can't be frivolous. It has to be actual. I mean, it has to be supported by the market and be reasonable.
See, and I purchased land for the tribe, so, you know, we're looking for the best value, but all of our allotted lands that are highly fractionated, they're appraised as if it's one owner.
Right. Yeah, in order to do a comparative analysis, as we talked about before, comparing apples to apples, the policy has been both in the Indian Trust Property Valuation Division and the Land Buyback Program Valuation Division to look at the fractionated allotment prop tracts as if it was owned 1/1. So because the fee land transactions are typically owned by one owner. So we compare apples to apples of making that assumption that the undivided or the fractionated tract is owned by one individual.
What I've done is called the undivided interest ownership, and you appraise the property as fee simple, and then hopefully in the market you can establish sales of undivided interest in an area, if it's 1%, 10%, 20%, whatever it may be, to have a set of sales that you can pull in, paired sales to, say, in this scenario, a 2% or ownership would see a discount related to this type of percentage and apply the fee simple value, then apply the discount, and you come up with the undivided interest discounted value.
We have done the same thing. There was actually a study back in, I think, 2005, nationwide study to gather information about fractionated interest sales and to see what impact does fractionation have on value of property. And there was no substantiated or conclusive evidence to show, or evidence to show what the percentages are across the country. The local appraisers are required, each of the AVSO staff is required to look for that type of not property, but transactions. If there's fractionated sales within the market that they're researching, they should be obtaining those sales to see, as he mentioned, if there is a support for an adjustment based on the degree of fractionation.
And there aren't a whole lot of those types of sales to be out there to be found. We have a sales database in North Dakota and Minnesota that are just pretty large, and there's a handful, 10 to 20 sales that are good market representative of undivided interest discount sales, and it's so and you're going to see a wide range of discounts applied to those too.
And the other thing too, that's no different than in the private private ownership, is that when somebody's selling, of course, they want high value. When somebody's buying, they want the low value. So when the buyback program did valuations to give more credit or value to the properties that they're acquiring, they looked at it as if it was, they didn't look at, I mean, they didn't look at the current ownership, which there might be 1,000 owners. And if I mean, in reality, 1,000 owners, what can you do with that property? Because you can't get probably even 5 or 3 people to agree with what you want to do with the property, let alone 1,000 people. I mean, your management of that property is minimal. I mean, you can't really do much with 1,000, you know, for 1,000 owners to agree on a particular use of that property. So in reality, that property probably, if sold on the open market, probably would sold less than what we appraise it as if it was 1/1 ownership. But yeah, that's to give maximum value to the landowners, the undivided interest owners. How
Hi, my name is Linnea Jackson. I'm the realty specialist with the Hoopa Valley Tribe. I kind of had two questions. Going back to home site leases and determining fair market value, if you have an area which is primarily tribal land assignments or maybe HUD low-income rentals, ownership lease to own, how do you determine fair market rental value on allotments to determine that value when there's a lack of data for that? And then with the appraisals, how do you deal with dispute resolution if the co-owners aren't agreeing to that appraised amount? What if they think the valuation is low and they're, essentially not happy with the amount that's valued?
Okay, I'll start with the dispute of an opinion of value. An appraisal is really a tool for making decisions. It doesn't set the market. When you receive an appraisal report, that's the starting point for negotiations. Unless there's a specific regulations, like typically BLM has those type of regulations where the land manager can only go vary so far from the opinion of value provided by an appraiser. But in Indian country, there is no such thing. You can go as high as you want as far as negotiation, and you have authorities to go below fair market value too as well. But dispute, you can call the appraisers, as I mentioned before, are consultants too. They can come in, you can ask the appraisal record to explain the appraisal report to the parties. And hopefully that resolves some of the questions they may have about the valuation. But if there's a differences in value, even with that consultation and explanation of the appraisal report, we as appraisers defend our opinion of value, but we don't get involved in the negotiation process. That's outside our scope. The second question was related to the rentals of estimating market rental estimates on Indian reservations. If there's a lack of comparable rental or leases around that's similar to the properties on the reservation, we have used the rate of return method. We will estimate the fair market value of the land and then apply a rate of return to come up with an annual rent. Do you do the same?
Usually we have pretty good market data to establish. A lot of our farmhouses that if they're not owned, they're rented, and there's going to be a written contract on there. It may or may not be market contract, but at least it gives us a bracket to be in. If there is lack of that support, the income support, the method of the rate of return, we know that properties of these types are going to give a 2 to 3% rate of return or 8 to 10%, and you could apply that rate of return to the value and come up with an income.
Yeah, to establish consistency and also to improve or to reach or to provide credible appraisals on Indian reservations, we've tried to partner up with our sister agencies such as Farm Service Agency, Farm Credit Agency, HUD, and others to share information as far as rental information, going rate data. Because the greatest asset for appraisers is the property transactions, whether it's lease or sales. And so if we share the information more, I think it'll improve the valuations on Indian reservations.
My name is Peggy Doney. I'm from the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in Montana. And I have a question on recreational values. We had a case here in this past year where this individual had a 108-acre tract, and he wanted to sell it to the tribe, but he wanted recreational value. And he was demanding an outrageous price for it and didn't want it appraised. He was going to put it into fee status and sell it to a non-Indian. So the tribe didn't want it going into fee status, so they agreed to buy it. But they wanted it appraised, so we got it appraised. But this individual went to our contract appraiser. We have the 638 contract for the appraisal program. And I think he intimidated her, and she appraised it at recreational value. But what she did was she used the comps from, it was close to the mountain, not really adjacent to the mountain, but it was close. And on the other side, there's these recreational towns, one called Landusky and one called Zortman. And so she used recent sales from those recreational sales as values, and she appraised it as appraisal value, which was like $3,500 per acre. And so that's what he was demanding. And the tribe didn't want to pay him that much money, but it went down to Billings for review, and it got approved down in Billings. And so the tribe rejected it. And we've never had that incident before, and I've been working for the tribe for 42 years, and I've never seen a recreational value. But my question is, what constitutes an appraisal, a recreational appraisal on the reservation? And does the tribe have a right to reject that appraisal, which they did by resolution? They rejected the appraisal. And does an individual seller have the right to go to the appraiser and demand what kind of appraisal that he wants? Because in this incident, I think that's what happened.
First of all, the appraiser, they can consult the landowner or the requester about the subject property and get as much information about subject property as possible. But the final decision on the scope of work, as you mentioned, highest and best use, which is usually the basis for fair market value, is the appraiser's decision. We abide by ethical standards or conduct. As appraisers, our license and certifications are subject to the conduct or activities we do. So we're supposed to remain unbiased and objective and independent as far as conducting our appraisals. As far as maybe, let's see, I didn't catch the second part. Would you repeat the second part? As far as the highest best use determination, I mean, what determines value, and or maybe the highest best use? When you mentioned recreational property, it's determined by a 4-step process on when an appraiser looks at a property, and is supposed to support the property's highest best use based on what is physically possible, legally permissible, financially feasible, and maximally productive use. And they're supposed to provide support for that in their determination of highest best use.
Yeah, because on our reservation, we have no type of recreation. And so she used those off reservation, which I understand that they have the right to do that. But it was a big surprise, I guess, for the council to have to deal with. In the end, they ended up not buying it. This individual hasn't put it into fee status yet, and it hasn't been sold. It's just a small piece of grazing land is all it is.
And it sounds like it's like a negotiation strategy to try and strong arm the tribe to buy at the price that he or she wants.
Then in addition to that, right adjacent to where this individual was trying to sell the land, there was a lady working on a land exchange with the tribe, and the appraisals were already done. Well, the review appraisers and Billings called the appraisal back on the tribal land and said that the land she was trading for needed to be changed. So he sent it back to our contract appraiser to appraise it as recreational value. So that went up, and it was the tribe's tract, but they rejected that also. So it seems like that I guess the regional office was using their authority to dictate to our contract appraiser how she should appraise that land.
I think I faintly remember that the transaction or that case. Jim Green is the acting regional supervisor appraiser, and I believe he and Nate Downing, I think, met with the council at least once or twice to explain how they came up with their conclusion to accept the report by the fee appraiser. I think they all did their own investigation. I think the reviewer of record was Nate Downing, and I think they did look at the evaluation. And when we do a review, we follow the steps that the appraiser took to come up with his or her own conclusions of value, and what support that they used, the conclusions they made, the extraordinary assumptions that they may have invoked, or hypothetical conditions to make sure that it's valid and reasonable. We do quality control of that report that we're reviewing, and I'm sure I can't explain specifically about why things went the way they are, but you are right. The council or either individual landowners, when we provide an opinion of value, you're not obligated to use it. You can obtain your own appraisal report. It's an opinion. It's an opinion of market value. That's all it is.
Yeah, and one of the conditions that the tribe put on that purchase, if they did buy it, is that he was to lease the land back. He wanted to lease the land back after he sold it, and they wanted recreational appraisal value on it. So we couldn't find anything. We went to Billings, and they said there wasn't really a recreational value appraisal, but normally it was like 10%. So the tribe had me write up a lease document at 10%, and this individual was really threatened by it, and I really caught it from him. He gave me a piece of his mind, but it was just a draft form for them to follow. But we couldn't find a recreational
Well,
lease value.
Well, it sounds like you did the prudent thing of making your own decision on what you think is in your best interest, and asking those questions, those type of questions. I mean, you as the landowner can ask pertinent questions to the appraiser, anything that you want. Like like my house appraisal, when I receive a report and if there's something that's odd, I ask the appraiser why did they ignore some of these stuff or the conclusions they make. I mean, it's being an active owner and asking the appraiser those kind of questions, those valid questions, and the appraiser is obligated to respond and provide the answers.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly from Umatilla. Andy, this is a question for you. We're looking at some fee property, and there are two structures, two buildings that are encroaching on a county road. You as a fee appraiser, would that impact the value?
So you have a property line dispute with the buildings across the property line?
Yes. Two of them.
And the building that we're doing for the appraisal for isn't one of those two?
The buildings are on the property we're looking at purchasing.
But it's not those two buildings.
Yes, it is.
It is those two buildings. I would have a big issue with that because you can't separate a building right on the property line. And there would certainly be some functional depreciation tied to it because it's functionally obsolescent that you can't, if you buy the property, you can't get to the other half of the house or building because you don't own that part because it's across the property line. So there would be some high levels of depreciation on there.
We talked to the county, it's a different county than Umatilla, and they said at this time there wouldn't be a problem. However, if we purchased it and we plan to improve, then there would be a problem.
Yeah, county rules, yeah, not sure.
Okay. And then Eldred, I have a question for my coworker here. We have compacted realty. Who is the appraiser's client? Is it the tribe or the BIA superintendent?
The new DM identifies the AVSO as the client as well as the tribe if you're a self-governance or self-determination tribe. So there's co-clients because the tribe engages the fee appraiser to do the work, and so and has an obligation, appraiser-client relationship with the tribe too as well. But in order for us to do the appraisal review and contact your appraiser that you've hired and resolve any deficiencies in the report, being identified, AVSO being identified as a client will allow us to contact the appraiser and correct the deficiencies so that we can accept it.
Hi, my name is Joanne Smith. I'm from the Spirit Lake Tribe. I have a question. We were approached, how do you appraise a residential property?
If residential property, you'd inspect it, see what it is, measurements, sizes, conditions, location, gather all the pertinent data, find the sales that are similar to that, the range of values. For me, I do my adjustments on a per deeded acre basis, which isn't per square foot, but the math still works out the same for the total value. So you'd have a house that's built, costs $200,000 to build, and it may only be worth $50,000. So there's that much depreciation on there. The difference between your subject may only have 30% depreciation, so there's 70% left. You would adjust the sale up because of the depreciations are different.
How do you consider, okay, we have this tract. This gentleman, we were wanting to buy this 80-acre tract. He came back, it's used for hayland. About 60 acres of it is hayland, the rest is trees and whatever. And he said my banker said this would be considered residential property. and he wanted like 5,000 an acre. I said, what? It's used for hay.
Well, if you have an
So how, he said, well, because there's a road right through it, you have, we have our ambulance service located on the south side of the road, and our Head Start buildings on this side of the road. But on this side of the road is our buffalo pasture, and then his 80 acres is there, and he cuts it for hay.
You may have a different property types in one property. So you have your hay property of, let's just call it 60 acres. You got 15 acres of woods, and then you have 5 acres of site, and that would be the site value or residential value. So your site value might be $5,000 an acre on the 5 acres. Your wooded acreage might be $1,000 for recreation, and then your hayland might be $500 an acre. And you should have sales to support those different property types within your market.
We don't. I mean, there wouldn't be any comparables. It's right within the reservation.
Right, so if each property has a relationship to different types of property types. If cropland is always going to be, let's say that pasture is always going to be 50% the value of cropland. So you may not have all the sales, but if you have enough sales in time, you can study those sales to figure out the relationships between them, and that would help establish the differences in values for the different property types, even if you don't have any of those sales currently.
Okay. So if you did an appraisal on this, would you consider the whole 80 as residential?
Nope. The highest and
See-
best use would have different highest and best use within that property. You'd have 60 acres of highest and best use for
Yeah.
hayland, 15 acres for woods, 5 acres for residential site.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He said, no, I want 5,000 straight across. I said,
That
oh,
wouldn't be
that's
correct.
ridiculous. No. Okay, thank you.
I want 5,000 straight across.
And that's one thing about, as I talked about negotiation strategy, be wary of people that are selling property to you because they want maximum dollars. And they'll approach you based on the maximum value they can get for their property. So question it. I mean, it's like anything else when you're private ownership. Always try to negotiate down as much as you can. An appraisal doesn't set the market. Question that appraisal report.
Hi, my name is Tanish Burgess, Comanche Nation. My question is in regards to the farming and grazing leases that the Bureau sends out every year. In the past, and recently, I've had some questions to myself from just people that I know in regards to those leases. They were, my question to you is, does the value of their property ever go up once it's appraised? If it was appraised 20 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, does that value ever go up or does it just stay the same?
Well, in reality, I mean, you would think that the value should change with the market. And that if the market's gone up, if for the surrounding areas, the agriculture market's gone up, then the rental should be going up, or vice versa if it's going down. I know the valuations in the past in Southern Plains have been based on, I think it's the competitive bidding process, the rents that are established through competitive bidding. But one of the things that I think has gone on is the market participants, the lessees, have controlled the rental rate. So they don't outbid each other. There's no open competitive bidding of those rental rates. And if we're using those sales or rental rates that are being established through those bidding process, well, you might see a flat line forever because they're controlling the market. Gotcha. And so what we've been telling this mass appraisal model not only takes into account on reservation or allotted leases, but also off rental rates on off reservation. So we've seen that there is a difference in some of the leases that are on state lands and fee lands. So that mass appraisal, by the way, should be done fairly soon. We're collecting subject property information for the various locations. I think we just received some for Concho. And then we're moving from agency to agency. I think we do market rental studies for, I think, 5 or 7 agencies. So it's a big undertaking, but we're we're really confident that this mass appraisal approach will expedite the valuations than it has been in the past. It used to take about almost 3/4 of the year to do it. And right now, our staffing has really gone down. We're down to, at the end of this month, we'll be down to one review appraiser and a appraisal trainee. Mr. Hatfield is retiring at the end of this month, and so we need that mass appraisal.
My name is Dennis Womavoya with the Comanche Nation. Whenever in the southern region, whenever you buy a quarter section of land or parts thereof, and it's usually divided by natural boundaries, north half, or northeast quarter, etc. But in a quarter section of land, in the southern region, you have the 33-foot of statutory right-of-way that you don't get use of, but then the legal description goes to the center of the road anyway. As with sometimes if there's improvements on the road, it's a 50-foot that comes off. Sometimes it's 100-foot. And so you're paying so much an acre for going to the center of the road, which you don't get to use anyway. And the problem there, the question I have is whenever you deal with the highway right-of-way that goes through the middle of that quarter section, and that right-of-way takes a 33 to 40 acre tract out of that quarter section, but then the description still says tract number such and such, the northeast quarter containing 160 acres. When the appraiser gets that, how does he deal with that? Because in some of the appraisal reports that come back, it's still pricing it per acre, and that per acre price is comparable to other quarter sections that you get the use of the whole thing. Where in this particular case, whenever you take that right of way out, you don't get that. And the appraisal per acre is not adjusted, but we're still paying for property we don't get.
Yeah, the appraiser should be looking at the impact on value of the existing encumbrances or such as a road right-of-way and how does it impact the value on the remainder of the whole tract and compare it with other similar properties with the same impact. So if there's a difference in value because of that encumbrance or road, then the market should recognize or should show the appraiser that there is a difference in value. In other words, comparing similarly impacted tracts should be used to compare it to the subject property or the tribal allotment or allotment land. I'm sorry.
I would just question, so if they put a road through the middle of it and take 10 acres, the updated deeded acres should now be 150. That's not the way it's done? Okay. So if they're valuing this farm here at $2,000 an acre and yours at $2,000 an acre, that would be ineffective because really you only have, okay, I get it.
Sure. Yeah. And the other thing to consider too is that for an appraiser to consider is what impact does that road have on the highest best use? Has it changed in the before situation, since in the after situation with the existing road being in place, how's it encumbered the use of the property? It may limit it to only specific uses, and as before, it may have other uses that could be allowed on that property or physically possible on that property. But we're supposed to take into account that impact of the existing right-of-ways.
The way that I would approach that is that if your farm is $2,000 an acre, you're going to have 320,000 acres for the sale at 160 acres, and yours is going to be valued at $300,000 an acre. $300,000 total, but you're going to divide it by the same 160 to come up with a different per acre number, but that would be how I'd handle it.
So Eldred, you brought up the subject of staffing, and the rumor has it that we're going down to one appraiser in the Great Plains region. So what is that going to mean for appraisals and the timing of appraisals and how long they may take?
Well, There is, I kind of mentioned early on that the department, after consolidation, we thought, the restructuring or the changes in appraisals in the Department of Interior has stopped. That we've done the changes and that we're ahead of the game. The department talked about the major restructuring of the Department of Interior. We thought that we're a step ahead, that we were already making that move to make the changes in appraisals that would meet the requirements under the major initiative. However, recently we were told to downsize our FTEs from around 200 FTEs combined. This is federal lands and Indian trust property lands, value appraisers or appraisal staff to about 150. And this is because of the shortage in funding too as well. And so we're evaluating the current structure and to establish more efficiencies. Like we realized in the Indian trust property site that earlier I mentioned that there was about 50 administrative staff in relation to the appraisal staff. So what the department or what AVSO wants to do is put more appraisers on the ground. So we've got plans on how to to put more appraisers within or establish more appraisers within AVSO to meet the requirements that we currently have. As far as the vacancies, we should be right now through staffing analysis, workload analysis, refilling those vacancies that we have in Great Plains, Southern Plains, and other locations, because we did go through a VERA VSIP process recently, and some appraisers did take the buyout and accept it the early out. And so we as AVSO as a whole intend to fill those positions that are needed to meet their current requirements. And take into account some of the streamlining, like mass appraisals. What is the actual staffing that's required to meet the workload within each of the regions? But it's not a reduction in force or anything. We're looking at our operations to make it more streamlined and cost effective.
And so under the Trust Reform Act, parties can go out and get a private appraiser to come in and do the work, and as long as they all agree, right? And as I understood it, the appraisals were going to be done by certified general appraisers, and there would be an approved list of appraisers that are available to do those. Is that list out there somewhere?
Chris, we don't have an approved list. We recommend appraisers that have successfully provided evaluations that are acceptable, and we recommend appraisers that we work with, but we don't have an approval process or an approved list.
Okay. So they just need to be essentially a general appraiser.
So what in the Dodd-Frank Act that happened in 2008 or so, the banks have come up with an approved appraiser process that they use, that most people in my shoes, you contact the bank, you give them 3 sample reports, you copies of your certifications, your E&O insurance, and 3 references is how they get their approved appraiser list. That's what they use.
And that's why when you have an evaluation for a loan, go to the lender, because they have their own criteria on as far as approved appraisers, as well as their specifications on what they expect the appraisal report to contain or follow.
Okay, this is your last chance for getting your questions answered. Here we got one. We have about 5 to 10 minutes here. The young lady's going to be passing out the appraisal forms or the evaluation forms for you.
Eldridge. George Ducharme one more time.
Okay.
So the minerals appraisal services, whatever that trap is, every appraisal that I send in has to go to them. I've got a 2.5 acre parcel with a home, a garage, a storage shed, a paved yard, a paved driveway, manicured lawn, and they want to evaluate whether there's gravel there or not. And it takes them a month and a half to do that, and my client is waiting. How do they come to that determination? Who makes that determination? At home, I know the land. Yes, there's a gravel pit next door, but I'm not going to put a gravel pit in my backyard. Why even hold up my appraisal?
Yes,
And it's regardless of the property, we have no coal, we have no oil, we have no natural gas. So I know the mineral that is there is aggregate. Why are we evaluating it? I have a gravel pit next door that's filling the need. My backyard is not going to do that.
Great question. AVSO or OAS before the consolidation was fighting or was questioning that process that was established. It was built into the OASIS system, the appraisal request system, to program the system so that every request that comes in, whether it's a right-of-way lease or something a transaction that doesn't have anything to do with minerals, or even if minerals are not part of the conveyance, if somebody wishes to hold the ownership of the underlying subsurface and wants to sell the surface, they still wanted a mineral evaluation to be done. This is DME. The requirement came from DME. We fought it, and the RSAs, the local appraisers, they saw that the timeline that was extending out. They were getting a lot of complaints from the landowners as well as BIA. And finally, just recently, that requirement, I was told, went away so that not every request goes to DME, and it doesn't get held up by DME because it added sometimes 30 days to 2 months to the process. Yes, now you can. Yeah, now you can. The system doesn't, there's no showstopper anymore.
Did you just say there is no requirement that goes to DME?
No, unless you specifically require it, a mineral evaluation.
All of mine have gone. When did this take place? I'm answering questions last week.
I'd say it's probably December is when I first heard about it.
Well, when I talked to Rena last week, I had to write an email to her explaining why I didn't want it, why it didn't have to go back to them. It's already been to them and back. Now they want me to prove that we want to come out and collect data. No, you don't.
Well, I'll go back and talk to the folks.
It's being held up today, Eldridge.
Yeah, let me research it because your self-governance tribe.
Yeah, we are, but
that's another thing I think that the new organization, the department that oversees Indian trust property valuations failed to understand is that the tribes have a control on how they want to do their valuations, and they can customize.
When is that going to take place?
I'll do the talking today.
Because I'm not getting that luxury either.
I'll get the talking today. I'll verify whether they actually changed the program, the OASIS system, to avoid that stop in DME. And I think it was we were told in the AVSO leadership meeting that OASIS has been adjusted to avoid that process. Yeah, there's been ideas like that, like a toggle switch where you can, or a radio button where you can select lease or surface only, some indicator that would avoid mineral valuation from being requested. But it was, well, I've almost said something that it's an inside information, but there's a reason why DME wanted everything to go to them. And I think we've reached an understanding, not understanding, but a consensus from DME that it should not everything should go to them.
Is my problem that I'm not using OASIS?
No. Well, maybe. Well, maybe because Rena, let me talk to Rena because if it's a hard copy process, then you can change that. Rena should have implemented the new policy.
I should be able to write on that hard copy, I don't want DME to review.
Right.
Go forth and do good things.
Yeah, let me call Rena afterwards and find out the particulars, and I'll get back to you. And I've got this presentation before we close for you. If you want a copy of it, it has a lot of information about update of the, I'm going to give you an update of where AVSO is as a new consolidated appraisal office. And I've got an updates on 43 CFR. The main thing about this is that the waiver for appraisal review also applies to 638 tribes. So self-governance tribes, you can invoke the waiver of an appraisal review by the Department of Interior. So
The appraisal is still required to review.
you can request a BIA to approve a waiver so that it's not, the report that you obtain is not reviewed by the department. But the appraiser has to meet certain qualification conditions. Yeah.
Elridge, this is Delano Saluskin with Yakima Nation again. You know, I'm listening. I mean, the message that I'm beginning to hear is that BIA appraisers are short-staffed. You have short staff there, and you're moving towards this concept of mass appraisals, which was used during the land buyback. Now, am I hearing that correctly? That even when I asked you about at Yakima Nation, you mentioned that if we were to go back and utilize your services, it sounded like mass appraisals was going to be part of the solution. And I'm wondering, is that the wave of the future here, mass appraisals?
We are trying to apply it as where it's applicable and where it provides credible opinions of value. We have used market studies such as on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation, and it works very well for the market rental rates for agricultural property. Rena has suggested that we apply that on the Yakima Indian Reservation, and we have provided a statement of work and some technical guidance to the tribal appraisers on how to obtain that service. And so we have tried to help the nation in meeting their appraisal service shortfall that they have. I mean, you've got a huge backlog on your appraisals, and we understand that, and we're concerned, and we would like to help.
Casey Foster, citizen Potawatomi Nation, Oklahoma. I just had a question in regards to, the timeline that it takes to get appraisals. We as a self-governed tribe, we pay for all our appraisals. There is a list that Mr. Hatfield has sent us for approved appraisers, and we go by this list and we use them. My question is, when a tribal member wants to sell property to the tribe and we use an approved appraiser by you guys, would that be considered a conflict of interest since we are paying for the appraiser? Because I was informed just recently that it was, and had a huge argument just for days, because we pay for the appraisal. We pay for the appraisal, and that is considered a conflict of interest if the tribe purchases the property.
Well, first of all, I'll have to check with Hatfield, but in the Department of Interior, across the Department of Interior, we do not have an approved list. We recommend appraisers to use because they've done acceptable work in the past. But you're not obligated to use those appraisers. And same with the statement of work. I know Hatfield has provided statements of work to self-governance tribes at their request. And some of the tribes make it a routine process to obtain a statement of work from the regional supervisory appraiser so that it improves or streamlines the review and approval process. And they like that because they're not, oftentimes the program managers of the self-governance appraisal office are not specialists. They're not appraisers, so they like that assistance. But we should not be holding up your process, or there should not be a conflict of interest situation regarding, especially self-governance tribe, because you're you're autonomous, you're independent. You can customize your program as you see fit. My office, the Associate Deputy Director's office, administers the 35 tribal appraisal programs. If you want to talk about the specifics about your issue, that falls into, sounds like self-governance matters potentially, and we can investigate, see if we can correct that problem.
I'd say that if in the contingenting, limiting conditions of the appraiser, if the appraiser isn't the part of the tribe, they're independent. There's a statement in there that the appraiser says they have no dog in the fight. I mean, they're independent, and that it shouldn't matter to the appraiser who's paying for the report. You should be able to do a report that's justifiable and to your.
Thank you. I mean, my office went through an audit recently, and that was the finding. The only finding in our office was it was a conflict of interest, and that was on me. So I don't want any dings against me nor my office. So of course, I battled this lady for 2 days on a conflict of interest, and her only rebuttal was, well, you pay for it. You pay the appraiser. I was like, well, of course we're going to. I'm not going to wait 3 years on an appraisal, not one. So that was it.
The MOU that some of the tribes have entered into, that provides program specifications that's attached to the funding agreements. That's one of the things that's in there is the conduct of the appraisal. As Andy mentioned, they're supposed to remain objective, independent, and unbiased. If they do have bias towards the property or the parties, they're supposed to disclose that and also recuse themselves of that assignment.
Well, as I say in cowboy country, give these two cowboys a hand. It's all they're going to get today. Maybe that and lunch.